We're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Curious Leaders Path. I'm Todd Cargus. I'm here today with Katarina von Medel and Joanna Stone, as always. Thank you very much. And we're here today to talk about when we make choices that we regret. And maybe we can just jump right into it and talk a little bit about what we mean by that and what kind of regretful choices we might be talking about. I mean, originally, I'm going to also say the original title for this one was, when you've made a deal with the devil, and we've modified it a little bit, but yeah, why don't we start with that? When we've made choices that we regret. Who wants to jump in?
Well, so we're not talking about the regret of not walking the dog in the morning, right?
Right.
That could have really bad consequences.
And certainly within a leadership context, yeah. But I guess that could also be within a leadership context.
Well, I guess when I got really curious, and we were talking a little bit about this before we started, was, in the times that we're in right now, there's so many decisions that a lot of leaders are making right now. And I not to make this right, but I do expect that now they are making probably more decisions that they regret. Right. So that's sort of what started to kind of come up for me, right?
That they regret or that they may regret in the future.
You know what? I love that. I know that's so true, right? Because, they can purposely, there could be that aspect that, they may regret, they could bet that it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. Right. And they're going, okay, well, maybe this is right. And then afterwards it's like, oh, shoot. Right. So is it, I know that one of the sayings that I have is always like, you make your decision based on what you know in the moment. Right. And that's with whatever factors are. So it's right in the moment, but yeah, we could regret it later on. Yeah. That's a good point.
Well, and I mean, within leadership positions, I have certainly done things that I regret. I've been in places where I could tell. Do you want me to tell a story? I could tell a story. I'm going to strip the names out of it, but I remember this is not going to make me look good, but I'm going to tell anyway. But and it's a personal story. But I remember I was leading a team of software developers, and we were working long hours. It was absolutely terrible, and it was just the way it was the way that it was. It was this is almost 20 years ago, and one of them finally came to me and said, Todd, I can't work under these conditions anymore. And I remember I didn't even skip a beat. I just said, so do you need me to get you a box? And they responded, I don't understand. What do you mean? And I said, well, if you can't work under these conditions and I can't change the conditions, then I'm assuming you're fired. You're quitting. Are you quitting? Well, no, that's not what I meant. Oh, well, back to work then, I guess. And I know, right? It's like, it's terrible. It was a tyrant. Anyway, and it was at that moment I remember when they walked out of my office and I thought, oh, Todd, who have you become? Who have you really become? And
wow.
I ended up quitting that job not long after that. But
two good things is, number one, you realized it very quickly, and number two, you did something about it. So congratulations on that.
Well, I don't think I ever apologized to that individual. Oh, wait a minute. Years later, yes, I did.
There you go.
But,
there's always, I remember hearing a lot of leaders say this, where they said, these are the leaders that I respected, are the ones who would say this, is if my actions ever get reported in the papers, how would my kids feel about this?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And I've heard a few leaders actually say that is a metric that they use to decide, are they going to make the deal with the devil, or are they going to take sort of the high road, which often is the harder road, and really do something that really has better social implications, better implications for the environment, that type of stuff, right? And that's kind of where this whole conversation started for me when we were thinking about what we wanted to talk about. What I'm hearing a lot more from people is people who are fairly successful, and they realize that they've made compromises in their integrity, they've made compromises, and they did it knowingly. Yeah, and often they could justify it and say, well, I did it because I had no choice. There's always ways that we rationalize the decisions that we make that compromise ourselves and compromise our values. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it wasn't like really egregious, it's not like they were burning down a forest or spilling oil in the, some pristine waterway or something. But I mean, it did have, they know that they had negative implications on people, and some of it fairly long lasting. Mm-hmm. And many of them are now getting to the point where they're really trying to figure out how do they actually use their powers for good now. And so they're changing how they operate, they're changing what they're doing. Everybody's sort of responding to this realization in different ways. And after we had our initial conversation to sort of think about if this was what we wanted to talk about today, there was also a post on LinkedIn by somebody who's fairly high placed in the VC community. And she was saying, she was at another conference where there's a whole bunch of people standing around and saying, we really should make a change. We really need to. We have the power to make change, but I'm scared to lose my job. And so what she recommended in her LinkedIn post is how do we band together? How do we support each other? How do we hold each other accountable? How do we become sounding boards for each other so that we can actually really start making change in ways that we don't sacrifice ourselves, but also that we don't just, fall back into the comfortable, always doing the same old thing, and then pretending we didn't have a choice.
What came up to me when you started to talk, Kat, was the trade-offs, right, that the leaders have to make. Like there's this huge trade-off, and people who are outside, maybe they can see it and they go, "Oh my goodness me, they're doing this for the company instead of doing this or whatever." They're saying things, and what comes up for me immediately was the Apple video that came out just recently regarding the whole Mother Nature, which I love so much. Right, I was so inspired by it. I thought, oh great, oh my gosh, all these leaders are gonna get on their bandwagon and kind of go, but what you could see though is that Apple's choice in doing that could bring up a bunch of negative connotations to it, right? And you have to because there's a lot of people of greenwashing afterwards, this is all out, and the CEO kind of said, okay, we're going to do this thing, right? But there was a lot of consequences which came out of that. So it's what comes up for me is then some people can probably see it, as I heard from the community, the sustainability community, greenwash, yeah, sure, they do that, but they don't do that, and they're saying there's all these people that are doubting everything they're saying, but you would have to make you think that they would have had to make that conscious choice going back and forth as executives and leaders. And I think that this is where regret comes from, right? They at that point in time they make that decision thinking that it's the right decision because it's going to do that thing, and they weigh their odds, but then afterwards it's when you think about it because it didn't go the way you wanted it to go, or it hit this other thing, maybe that thing you thought was going to happen, that what you didn't think was going to happen, but it did happen. And then now you're going, oh, damn it, I regret making that decision. It's this sort of torture of oneself afterwards. After you're done it is where some of this regret comes up. But there is this conscious choice that they're making, knowing what they're coming into. Maybe that's the very difficult decision that they have to make, knowing those choices.
It's interesting because this is the moment where I want to bring up that definition of regret that I shared with you.
Yeah.
Earlier, because I think it might help frame where this conversation is going. So in Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown, as we know, details many emotions, and one of them is regret, and she positions regret this way. Regret is one of our most powerful emotional reminders that reflection, change, and growth are necessary. When used constructively, it's a call to courage and a path to wisdom. Which really bothered me the first time I saw it, because regret was one of those things that I didn't like being with. I would try to actively avoid regret whenever I could. But from this perspective, it's really quite different.
I think that's what Bruno's getting at.
Yeah, I was wondering, could you bring up Bruno's comment?
Let's pull that up.
Yeah, it's just, I thought that was awesome.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love this theme. For me, well, personally, I grew up in an environment where I was almost trained to be humble and learn from my mistakes and move on. Every
Mhm.
time I start to lean into any feeling of remorse, it seems like my brain blocks it and says, just move on.
Yep.
And I think that's really common for a lot of people. And I think it's most pronounced in men. And I don't mean to overgeneralize and say all men are the same and all women are the same, because we know they're not. But men are very conditioned. And I know Bruno, so I know that he's a really good guy.
Mhm.
Men are conditioned to ignore, well, we're all conditioned to ignore negative emotions, and none of us want to feel negative emotions.
Mhm.
And negative emotions can actually be very, lots of info, they can be packed with information. So we can get a sense of what's actually causing the remorse if we really dig down into it and allow ourselves to stay in those emotions. But it's not pleasant to stay there. So if we haven't trained ourselves to be uncomfortable in those emotions, we won't stay there. And on top of it, I think men are also socialized, and again, women are too, but in a different way. We're socialized to go on and be positive, and men are socialized to just get on and keep conquering. And obviously, that's really oversimplified and a little bit ridiculous on how I said that. But the messages to men and women are a little bit different, but the gist of it is quit wallowing, get on with it, move forward. But
Yep.
what we sacrifice when we do that, and we have to be careful to choose the right times to really allow ourselves to feel the unpleasant emotions of remorse. But the point of it is to really explore it and really think of what is it that we actually regret, because it's not always the obvious thing. And then when we dig down further, then we can also start figuring out, why did we compromise our integrity? Why did we make the decision that we probably knew we should have done differently? And it's hard to do that. Yeah. So I think this idea, Todd, your reaction, and Bruno, what Bruno wrote as well, I think is human nature.
Mhm.
But it's also human nature if we've developed the skills to allow ourselves to really learn from that regret. And that's the important part, not to beat ourselves up with it, but to allow it as a learning tool.
What's coming up for me as you say that, because I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's really, really good. And in order to be comfortable
Mhm.
being with regret, you're right. There, like, some work needs to happen.
Mhm.
And what I'm curious about here in this moment is, well, what about, those leaders who continue to make the damaging decisions and don't have the aha moment that comes with the regret, or aren't willing to be with the regret, and as a result will just double down on
Mhm.
whatever those decisions were? Because it seems to me, particularly if we're talking about, the big global decisions and the big global problems that we find ourselves facing, right, Joanne? And you both brought up sustainability and the environment. How can those leaders, and I don't know the answer to this question, but how can those leaders cultivate that relationship with regret? Oh, what a terrible way to phrase that. But you know what I mean.
No, that's
Like,
brilliant. I
really?
love that. Cultivating your relationship with regret. Absolutely.
Wow.
Treat it as
Okay.
a partner. Don't treat it as an enemy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's one of those friends that you really get annoyed with, but you keep going back to them because they tell you the truth, right? And you don't want to
Yeah.
spend all your time with them.
It's, what's coming up for me is was being found out that you were wrong, and how difficult it is
Mhm.
for people to admit that I'm wrong. And so as a leader, I make that specific decision, and then I made it on my best. If I go with my definition that all people are good people, right?
Mhm.
They make that decision because for the betterment of something. It's for something
Mhm.
to be better. I don't know, whatever it is. But then if all of a sudden, the decision is, it doesn't go as well as they want, and then all of a sudden they're wrong. You
Mhm.
know, they don't want to be. They don't want to be wrong. So I think it's
But
almost
it's not just a
accepting.
matter of being wrong. It's almost committing suicide when you do that. You're committing psychological suicide, which is an existential thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Because if
Yes.
you think about, and I'm trying really hard to find an example that's not going to be inflammatory, because I've got one, but I don't want to use it. You know, when you're so convinced that this is the way I'm supposed to be as a man, as a woman, as a leader, whatever role you're in, and you've been kind of raised and bred and reinforced to behave in that certain way because that's how these people are, right? And so your entire identity of I am that person, I am expected to be that person, and that identity, whatever the identity might be, is so deeply ingrained that if that role ceases to continue, I cease to continue, right? So when you start, yeah, like that's what I mean by it's actual psychological suicide in some cases. So when you see these people seriously doubling down, they have to, because they honestly do not see an out. And I'm using that word suicide intentionally. And I'm sorry to use such an inflammatory word, but it is psychological suicide for some people because they literally cannot imagine themselves being different people.
That makes me really sad.
Yeah, well, you know, well, I guess
Yeah.
what comes up for me is that if I'm this person that's a leader that's making these decisions, I want people to depend on me, right? Depend on
Yeah.
what I'm doing. So
Mhm.
one of the identities I have as a leader is that whatever I do, I say I'm going to do, right? You know, it's like, so I can't show up being a person that kind of like I have to know the pathway, right? In it, you know, I need to know the steps I need to go, or if I don't, I have to admit to it and know and being, you know, so if I'm unable to show up that way in the way of my definition of a leader, then people won't believe me as a leader. So I expect that there's this aspect of these things that they commit to, right? If they commit to it because you know that's who I am as a leader, I commit to these things, I make these decisions. If I can't, you know, make those commitments, then therefore I'm not a leader. Just to your point, right? It's just like I've now this definition of what a leader is now broken down on me. I'm just trying to figure out now from a regret perspective, is regret a fight then between what and what? Right? Would that person have regret or wouldn't they have regret? Because they're following what they think is the definition of a leader.
Well, I think the people that have regret are the ones that recognize they made a mistake. The people who are doubling down are the ones who are trying to suppress the emotion of regret at all costs. Yeah, and I'm convinced that most of the people that I know that have done wrong and know they've done wrong but are denying it, they are working hard to repress that sense of regret. Yeah, I don't think that's an easy task. I mean, they may be very skilled in it, so they may not even know they're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what makes them even more dangerous. Yeah.
And that's where my curiosity was, because it seems to me that if that doesn't crack open, then this all becomes much harder.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, Kat. Like there's, you know, there's a flood of examples of leaders who may or may not be in that situation that are popping into my head, and none of them are ones that I want to mention right now because you know, it's all in the news right now. You can take a guess. And
there's a lot to choose from there.
Exactly. And in the absence of that, you know, what's coming up for me right now is we in an earlier episode we talked about rehumanizing leadership.
Yeah.
And you know, regret is such a personal and human experience that the connection between allowing regret in and rehumanizing leadership just seems to be inextricably linked to me.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that you have to be able to identify that it is regret. You may not even know it's regret.
Right.
So, you know,
What does regret feel like, though?
Oh,
pardon?
What does regret feel like?
I don't want to think about it.
Well, I can tell you so the regret for me, like I had that constant regret for during the like after I was divorced, right? Did I make the right decision? Didn't I make the right decision? And I knew I made the right decision. There's no doubt I made the right decision. I can tell from my family, everything, and the whole thing. I knew it was the right decision. But it just came back. Should I have done this? Could I have done that? It's like it's the should haves, it's the could haves. It was that type of thinking. And well, if I did that, maybe it would have been better. Well, if I did that, you know, so I was in this like, you know, other sort of universe of, you know, wondering what would happen if I would have done it differently, and then feeling really sad about it, right? So that's where I defined it as regret. But and then it was like, oh my gosh, you're living in regret. Hold on a second, you know, what is that? Oh, okay, then why, you know? And then going back to, well, why did I make that decision again? Right, yeah. And I go, oh, then this is just going to keep popping up, isn't it? Yes, it is. Every single time you're going to see it, but it'll be better. And that's what happened.
And the important part is just allow the emotions to do their job. Just allow the emotions. And again, you have to, so I always talk about, it's kind of like you need the stereo interface, you need the on off button, because sometimes you do have to just put the emotions away so you can get on with life, but then you have to return to it. So you have to turn it on again. And then you need the volume control so you can really feel the emotions intensely. Or if you don't have the energy to do it and you want to really allow those emotions to do their job, then, but you don't have the energy to do it, then you kind of just turn down the volume and make it a bit softer, right? But it's, you have to go through those emotions. And once the emotions have done their job, they go away and they don't come back. It basically, I mean, what that means is your nervous system has rebalanced itself. That's really what you're doing. Yeah. And if you think that regret, I haven't thought this through, but what came to me when you were talking about it, regret is almost like accepting the death of something.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like when you were talking about your divorce, it's kind of like, it's like your marriage died and you had to let go of all the dreams, all the hopes, all the expectations. You had to adopt a new identity as a single person. Regret is sort of the doorway to allowing that figurative death to happen, and then to allow yourself into that grieving cycle where you can allow those emotions in the right way at the right time and allow them to give you the message, and eventually they do go away. You know, and with things that you're grieving, like things that died, whether it's a person that you loved or a relationship or something else, obviously there's always going to be a scar there. It's not like it's going to disappear and everything goes back to happy, but you can really make peace over time. You can really make peace with whatever it is that you lost, right? But that's what regret to me is actually the doorway to grieving, to healing,
to peace. Wow. And I think it's like, for me, sorry, Todd, you're gonna, I know you're gonna go, but I guess what comes up for me, it was almost that mirror that I needed to sat there and said, yeah, you did the right thing. You're okay, right? You're fine, right? And what else do you need? And it was like that nagging that, well, what else? Okay, I need this. Okay, great. You know, and then back to it. It was this constant kind of, it's good. We're all good.
And even if you realized maybe it wasn't the right decision, or maybe there was a lot,
I accepted it.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, even if you know it was the right decision, I mean, there's a lot that you have to give up on. I mean, there was obviously a benefit in being in that marriage, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And having the relationship with your husband and everything else, right? So it's a cost benefit, not cost benefit in terms of money, but although that might be part of it too.
Spreadsheet every day with emotions.
Honey, you're not contributing to my net worth enough anymore. You're gone.
Oh my.
Yeah. So it's sort of that cost benefit analysis, and there's always there's
Yeah, for
always
sure.
things that you have to give up in that situation. And it's really allowing yourself to to grieve that, right? Like it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Love it.
Well, and I don't mean to open a can of worms when we're 5 minutes to the end, but I'm going to try this one too. Well, no, because what I'm reminded of another earlier conversation that we had. Remember, for some things to live, other things sometimes need to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of that conversation was about being planful for the ending. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to be planful for regret.
Oh, that's an interesting concept.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And what comes to me when I think of that is we've talked about this before, right? Like all leaders exist within their
Yeah.
being and their doing, and
Yeah.
it seems to me that being planful of regret is really just knowing who I'm
Oh.
going to choose to be in that moment where I experience regret.
Well, what comes up for me when you started to talk about it too is just knowing that as myself as a leader, as I go through this, I'm going to make decisions which I'm going to regret, and
Mhm.
it's okay. So the planful
Ah,
aspect of it, right, is almost like knowing how I want to be with that regret, right,
mhm.
as I process through it. And like as Bruno said about learning, and it's just like,
Mhm.
and what we're talking about, like when we go through it, just like, well, what is my relationship with regret? Right. Well,
Mhm.
I'm tucking it in the lower drawer. I don't want it. Ooh, hold on a second. So
Locking it up nice and tight, putting a
yeah,
sofa in front of
exactly.
it.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'll bring it out every once in a while, if I have to, because the drawer's so full. But before I put the next one in, yeah. So I just think that there's something with that if you had that specific plan as to how you're going to deal with it, that may help in a way too.
I wonder if we can go back to our name of curiosity, the Curious Leader's Path,
Yes.
right? Because it's planful, yes. And my students called me out the other day because I was saying, what's the definition of strategy? And they pointed to one of the definitions I had that I obviously had not corrected, where it started with strategy as a plan. And I'm constantly like snapping at people and saying, it's not a plan. So I'm having a hard time with the word plan.
Okay.
Although I appreciate what you guys mean by it. So I'm not
Mhm.
pushing,
Yeah,
I'm pushing back on the
approach.
word, not the concept. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if what we can do, and this is where leaders, the leaders who really are doubling down, we can't change a lot of those people, but what we can do is prevent a lot of people from being locked into the identities by teaching them to be curious and making their primary identity curiosity.
Yes.
Yeah. Or a
Ooh.
primary part of their identity to be curiosity. Yeah. Because that allows us, whenever we realize that we're making a mistake that we can laugh at least we can be curious and change it. But when we have those moments where we realize and we regret and we're mortified because of what we've done, that one is hard to dig yourself out of. That can be really hard. And I've unfortunately got a few of those. It's really hard to dig yourself out of it. But the more curious you can be, the more forgiving you can be of yourself. And therefore, the more you can learn how to make better decisions, how to heal whatever you need to heal in yourself that allowed you to go down that road in the first place. And you can sort of heal from it, learn from it, recast yourself, and then become a much more positive force. But I think we have to cultivate this curiosity as part of our primary identities.
It's
And
that opportunity to kind of go, hey, what's that? What's that thing I'm feeling? What is that?
Yeah.
Rather than, I don't like it.
Yeah.
And
it's also curiosity it's also the curiosity of when you recognize you really did harm.
Yeah.
Then being curious, and it's not the only thing you need to do. Obviously, you need to make amends in the right way at the right time, etc. And that's a whole process unto itself. Maybe that's a conversation we need.
Cleaning up our messes.
Yeah. But a large part of it is really then being curious to figure out, why did I do that? And being honest with yourself. And that's a hard conversation to have, but it's powerful. And it allows you to make sure you don't do that nastiness again, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. It's the spreadsheet that's coming up for me. So, but I do think there's this aspect of, understand going back to curiosity and understanding what your values are, right? Like even if what you did, if you guys aren't familiar with it, then you can pick up a values sheet, right? And there's like tons of sheets which are out there of 100 values or 50 values. Go through it all, right? Like just kind of like have like which values did it support, which values didn't it support, right? Because there was a choice that was made between the values. And there's a consequence that happened afterwards, and you're going like, ooh, and that's a way to kind of understand yourself a little bit more, is by understanding what those things are, and then you're more aware of it, and then the next time you make that decision, you can kind of go, ooh, that creativity value just got trumped, and I like creativity over success, right? So do I want to make this next decision in a different way?
And it's an opportunity and invitation to change something that we don't like. Well, no, because if there's a regret, it's something we don't like. So, there's an opportunity to change it. There's an opportunity to do better.
Yeah.
It's back to Brene Brown's definition, right? Like it's beautiful.
Courage.
Yep.
Self-love.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Oh my, this was a good conversation.
Oh, it's never enough time.
It really is.
I can hug myself now. I love you.
We're over time. Are there any last words that you want to just, put out there before we sign off?
I think you always have a choice. You can hide your regret, you can push it down, or you can choose to learn from it and then really, and the beautiful part, it's not just that you can make amends. It's not just that you can become a better person, but you can actually become, I think for those people that have sort of walked through real hardship and have had to make amends for really bad things that they've done, regardless of how bad it is. Obviously, there's some things that are kind of maybe not so forgivable, but if you really do the work of recovering from a really serious regret, you can also become one hell of a positive force because you understand what the compromises are, which means that you can make much better decisions. You can show up much more authentically. Yeah, I think there's huge power, like monstrous power, in really working with your regret and turning it into real opportunity.
I love that.
And what I would add to, because I've seen some of the executives go and stand up and say, yeah, I fucked up. Right. Yeah. So, and I think it's so powerful when they did that. Right. I would add to what you're saying, Kat, and just say, give yourself the space.
Yeah.
To be able to have it. Right. Because it is super, super important. And so to reflect, to look at it, right. Just give some space if it's whatever amount of time you can.
And love yourself in that process. Love yourself regardless of what you've done, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's all human. We're learning.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't have anything to add. Those are both excellent.
Oh, Todd, you always do. Come on.
No, I mean this time I mean it. It's I think I love that, it's what I'm taking away from this is it's never too late. And there's real power in exploring it, like real genuine power in exploring it. And that's the secret sauce for me. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I love it. I think it's fantastic. So great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to sign off. Thanks everyone who joined us for this episode. It was a fun one. And
thanks for the comments, Bruno.
Thank you, Bruno, for the comments. And as always, thank you, Kat. Thank you, Joanne. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Good night, everyone.